No, that's ridiculous. That's not something for the schools.
I'm a consent educator, and sometimes I don't know what consent is. Because here's the thing, sometimes when we talk about consent, we mean legal consent. We're talking things like age of consent, capacity to consent, and that can sometimes be for a non-sexual thing like checking a box that says, yeah, you can, store my data on a website, or sometimes it is like a sexual consent thing. But even with sexual consent, sometimes that means permission, right? Like I give you permission to store my data, I give you permission to go down on me, penetrate, whatever. But sometimes, especially when talking, or I think probably only, especially when talking about sex, sometimes consensual doesn't mean agreed to, but means wanted. For example, my boyfriend and I are making out, and then he, starts doing things downstairs to me. There might not be a moment where I have given him permission. And also, I might say that that situation was consensual, not because of permission, but because I wanted it. There's lots of research to talk about how sometimes consent is talked about as an external thing and sometimes it's an internal thing like a feeling. But then we also have liquid clay. But then we also have this new push for teaching consent to kids when we're using the term consent, but what we actually mean is boundaries, body rights, bodily autonomy. Right, a parent might say to a kid, hey, bud, can I take your picture? Right, they're asking for permission of, am I allowed to do this thing? And it's amazing that parents are doing this and treating children like people, not just assuming that they have the right to take a photo of them, touch them, etc. Right, you also might hear a 7-year-old say, like, I didn't give consent for her to play with my hair. They're not talking about something sexual. They're saying, I didn't give permission. They're saying, that's beyond my boundaries. They're saying, we didn't talk about this. But that is very different than a conversation about sex and age of consent. Now, both things do belong in school, sex education, social emotional learning, and the place where they overlap. But when people are thrown off by the idea of teaching consent to kids, I get it. We use this one really weighty word to talk about things from like really serious, like if it's not consent, it's sexual assault, to like, again, you didn't get my consent to take my photo, mom. There's a whole webinar on YouTube that I did, which is about how do you talk about consent? I know when I'm talking to students, teachers, anyone, and they use the word consent, usually my first question is, what do you mean when you say consent? Do you mean, was this allowed according to law, according to the school's policy? Were you asking, was this wanted? Were you asking, is it okay that I feel hurt that this happened? I know in my work, I differentiate between the legal aspects and the non-legal aspects by talking about the like legal aspect of getting consent and the practice of consent, right? Where you practicing consent and part of that is asking for permission, checking in, handling rejection well, etc. Yeah, I'm a consent educator who does not like the word consent.